You're listening to an IOE podcast from the UCL Institute of Education. Powered by UCL Minds.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for this online event about school leadership during the Covid-19 pandemic and how leaders can best navigate these crisis conditions. I'm Dr. Sandy Leaton-Gray, Associate Professor of Education at the UCL Institute of Education, and I'm your chair this afternoon. Now, in terms of how we'll run the event, once I've introduced our speakers, I'll kick things off with a couple of questions. But we're here to respond to your questions, which you can share throughout using the YouTube chat facility or via Twitter using the hashtag IOE Coffee Breaks. So to the introductions, as I've said, I'm Sandy Leaton-Gray. My own expertise is in the sociology of education and spans education policy, teacher professionalism, curriculum and assessment, as well as artificial intelligence and biometrics in education. And with me today, I'm very pleased to introduce Qing Gu, Professor of Leadership in Education at the IOE and Director of our Centre for Educational Leadership. Qing's research interests include teacher resilience and effectiveness and school improvement and systemic change in relation to England as well as internationally. Now, among her many roles, Qing is a member of research advisory committees for both the Cabinet Office's National Leadership Centre and the UK Chartered College for Teaching. And I'd also like to introduce Roger Pope. As well as being visiting professor at the IOE, Roger is CEO of Education Southwest, an academy trust of 10 primary and secondary schools. Prior to that, Roger was principal of Kingsbridge Community College, which was among the first teaching and research schools and an early licensee for the delivery of national professional qualifications. He's also served as chair of the former National College for Teaching and Leadership. Roger continues as National Leader for Education, and he's currently working on school leadership projects in North Africa and Northern Europe. And in 2016, he was awarded a CBE for services to education. Now, I'd like to start with a couple of questions for both Qing and Roger. Qing, we can imagine the intense pressure that school leaders have been under since March. You'll both be talking to school heads all the time. Has anything surprised you in what they've said about the impact of COVID on their work as leaders?
Yes and no, Sally. Because I'm speaking as also a school governor of inner city primary school in Nottingham, and also a trustee of a multi-academy trust. Because over the last few months, it's not surprising to see there have been voices of deep frustrations and challenges that's relating to all aspects of leading a school. And I think what has really been added, we can see adding to is the workload and also workload complexity to what school leaders have to do and manage on a daily basis. And also speaking as a researcher, looking at the reports, like some of the work done by Professor Gemma Moss in the IOE, looked into teachers' duty of care. I think we can see is a very differentiated picture in the system, where the challenges are more intense are in those schools that serving socioeconomically more deprived communities. I think what is then, as Gemma has also written in her reports, has shown to us is this situation, COVID didn't cause this societal inequalities or the challenges for school leaders, but it certainly has really exposed more deeply and sharply some of the embedded structural inequalities in our society. And it also exposed very clearly schools and school leaders alone can't fix many of the challenges and many issues. And what really surprised me to some extent, which I shouldn't be surprised, is really also heartwarming to see the hard work, the duty of care, and the resilience, professionalism that our teachers and school leaders have demonstrated, trying to keep children safe and trying to keep children learn. And I think just in summary, what I have seen that in schools where I have worked is the school leadership that harnesses the energy and expertise from the school community, and that holds great promise to enable teachers and pupils to keep safe and keep learning. It has been an emotionally, physically, and intellectual challenging journey, and where things have worked and worked well are in those schools where you don't see the quick fixes, where you see sustained professional development and a strong school culture.
I mean, you have to really admire the amount of sheer emotional and physical labour that's gone into the post-COVID school environment, really, and you know, it's just extraordinary the lengths that people have gone to. And what struck you, Roger, in particular about this period then, and the impact on school leadership?
Whoa, where to start? Where to start? I think I'd like to just pick up a word that Ching used there when she talked about a differentiated response and a differentiated picture, and she drew from that particularly some of the what she referred to as the embedded societal issues, obviously, you know, disadvantaged children, disadvantaged communities. But I think we also need, when we're talking about this, to bear in mind the sheer range of different scenarios that there have been across the country, and also the way in which leaders have had to respond differently, if you like, what we'll call lockdown one and the ongoing picture. So I think if we go back to that time back in March with the initial lockdown, then I think that was a leadership response which was all about immediate command and control leadership. So there was a crisis, there is a problem that had to be solved, and so leaders went into that mode of, don't let's sit around and talk about this, don't let's have democratic leadership, let's just get on with it and solve the problem and work out how we are going to manage children continuing to learn when they're not in school. And I'm going to say something slightly controversial, but it could be that there are some school leaders who probably found that quite exciting. That was a kind of a dramatic moment in their leadership career that they had to respond to. I think what also characterized that period was a very strong sense of cohesiveness between local communities and schools. And there were many stories and some research evidence from surveys of feedback from parents, which was along the lines of, we never realized that teachers had to work so hard. We never realized that teaching a child was so difficult. We never realized how difficult it is to motivate a 14, 15-year-old to do some learning when they're at home. And I think there was, generally speaking, a sense of mutual regard and respect for what parents and schools were doing and a kind of coming together. Now, since then, I think we've had a much more divergent picture across the country. So I was talking to some school leaders last week who are from the Northeast, who were talking about how some of their children have been out for 3-4 weeks since that initial lockdown. They were talking about teachers within their schools who had been hospitalized and had then died from COVID. So you've got those kinds of experiences down to other schools, say in the south of the country where I am, where they've only just started to have to send children home because of the need for shielding, where they haven't experienced any deaths directly within the school community. So I think when we're talking about leadership in this situation, I think we just have to caveat our remarks against the vast range of experience that leaders have had in different contexts, in different parts of the country. If I had to sum up the common feature across the country, it would be that leaders have had to retreat from strategic to operational mode. I think that, you know, we've got used to talking about heads, chief executives of trusts, taking a more strategic view, standing back, planning for the future. Actually, these people have been in firmly operational mode, and a very complex operational mode. We often think of operational leadership as being something simpler than strategic leadership. It's kind of something which is sort of slightly lower level. What they've been having to do is they've been having to lead in a rapidly changing, complex situation. Complex because the instructions, the lines of responsibility haven't been clear, particularly this time round. They've been getting one message from Public Health England, another message from the local authority, another message from the Multi Academy Trust, another message from parents. They've not been able to get those answers quickly. They've had the unions peddling another kind of narrative around keeping staff safe, etc., changing scientific evidence. In lockdown 1, the narrative was very much children cannot pass on COVID, let alone get it. And yet, lo and behold, in this iteration, we are seeing children who are testing positive, who are having symptoms. So really complex operational leadership. And I'll give you just one example. A school in our trust had to send home a bubble of 40 year 10 pupils last weekend. So 40 pupils had to isolate because of somebody in the bubble testing positive. On the Sunday, the head teacher of that school took 119 phone calls from parents relating to that issue. That's the level of operationalization. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly very different as a head teacher environment, isn't it? And very much thinking about the unknown and trying to anticipate the unknown in a way that perhaps people weren't expecting to do. And certainly the uncertainty as well about transmission rates and how that impacts on different age groups and so on. You know, there's conflicting science on that. So we've had very good reports from the Pasteur Institute and the Karolinska Institute earlier on in the pandemic, and it's perhaps time for another systematic review. So people are really working in the dark. Can I ask Ching now, what examples of good leadership practice do you think have emerged that have helped schools weather these uncertainties at the moment?
Sandy, I'm just thinking Roger will probably be able to give more concrete questions, but answers to that. But from my observation, certainly as a school governor, I did a curriculum review with one of our senior leaders. And what I took away from that conversation really kind of more or less reinforced what we have learned about why some schools are able to do well, and to be able to do well despite the challenges. At the heart of that is the deep trust within the school culture, that the senior leader was able to have the confidence that the head teacher and the CEO in the trust believing what she's developing in terms of in very difficult and challenging circumstances to create and mature the new curriculum she has developed for the school. And also its relentless focus on what really matters in these difficult situations when it's hard with all this managing the unexpected situations on a daily basis, is also to keep focused about keeping children safe and keeping children learn and how we can achieve that. And it was quite interesting to also hear from her talking about the importance of working as a team. She never felt she was alone. You know, all the issues we talked about, I think the 3 words I took away from that meeting is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Behind that, there is that professional trust. and focusing on the core business about how, given, I think within the pandemic, she was trying to say to us, we need to distinguish two fundamentally different issues. One is about trying to manage the technology and to teach children the way that we normally teach them in person. But a fundamentally different issue is about how to, in terms of pedagogy, managing and support children learn better, the online and blended learning. Those are fundamentally different issues. And as professionals and how we learn together, we just did a trust survey. And what I took away from the results is not that, I'm seeing songs for the trust, but I think what really worked, speaking to the school leaders, is a value, is a shared values that we're here for the children. I mean, one thing one of the leaders said to me almost put tears in my eyes. I was concerned about, of course, her workload developing a new curriculum given the challenges, and she just said, we have a strong team, and as a professional, it's part of my duty of care to ensure children are engaged in their learning. And I will stop here for the answer.
Roger, have you got anything to add? Is there anything that you've seen that really demonstrated best practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there are two strains of things that leaders are learning here, which are almost in opposition to one another, or could be, and therefore I think that it will be very interesting as we go forward to see how those tensions are worked out. So one strain is the kind of strain which Ching is referencing there, in terms of that value-centered leadership, the realization from leaders, very early in this, that actually they needed to be highly empathetic in their leadership, highly affiliative. They needed to be listening very carefully to what parents, students, staff were saying to them. They needed to show through all of their communications that they were responding. And if you look at both national organizations like ASCL, for example, the leaders organization, or you look at it at school level, or you look at it at the level of the multi-academy trust or the local authority, all of a sudden you get a multiplication of communication, weekly, daily newsletters, events, Zoom events for staff, in order to try and build that sense of collegiality. We're all in this together, we're listening to you, we're supporting you, we want to keep you safe, we want to keep you well, all of that kind of strain of stuff. And then I think there's been another interesting strain of leadership here, which is about being more directive. And so in this situation, leaders have realized that things have had to happen quickly. If you want to put in place online learning, it has to happen quickly. In terms of keeping children safe, there are all sorts of new procedures and processes and policies that have had to be introduced into schools instantly. And so, whereas historically heads will often say they want to do something and it will take 2 or 3 years to align all the staff to that new policy, they've suddenly realized they've got to do this immediately. And there are some things as a leader that you have to say, actually, this is what we're doing. So on the one hand, you've got an increase in that kind of affiliative style. And on the other hand, you've got an increase in that command style. And it will be interesting to see how the interplay between those two things works out as we move forward.
Do you think that will have a sort of an impact on school leadership and school communities in a more long-term sense then? I
do. I think that one of the things which this situation has brought about is an impatience on the part of leaders. In that there hasn't been time for all the kind of I'm going to say slightly irrelevant chat that you get around all sorts of issues sometimes. And I think they've had to cut through and say, no, no, actually, we need to get this in place now. We can't spend 6 months talking about the rights and wrongs of how best to do online learning. It's got to happen now, yesterday. And so I think that we will see an increase in that tendency to use standard operating procedures in schools, perhaps compared with what we've seen historically. And I think we will see, which we can say more about if we get onto this in a minute, I think we will see a change in some of those middle tier structures in our system as a result of this as well.
Do you think they'll disappear?
The middle tier structures?
Yeah, I mean, do you think the idea of leading from the middle is on the way out as a consequence of it?
I'm thinking more. I don't think it is in schools. I think at a system level. No, I was thinking about that middle tier. Is it local authorities? Is it multi-academy trusts? Is it regional schools commissioners? I think that as a result of what we have seen happening in the last 6 to 9 months, I think we will see changes and acceleration, and I can say more about that if you'd like me to.
I mean, I'm just wondering, do you mean top-down policy, in a very directed sense?
No, I mean that what Ching again, talked about collaborative approaches. What we have learned over the last 9 months is we have learned that however much a school might like to be seen as a self-determining, self-governing island, actually, at a time of crisis, no, you can only succeed through cooperation and collaboration with others, both because you need those collective solutions and also because you need succor and support. If you are going to go on a policy as a school to say, actually, we're not going to put children in bubbles, we're going to organise our learning in a completely different way against what the government tell us, you've got to be really brave if you're going to do that on your own. But if there's a group of schools doing that, then you're much better off. And what we've seen across the country is we've seen a huge variation in the ability of local authorities to respond, because many of them have no longer had the capacity, many of them have no longer got the relationships with their schools. We've seen regional schools commissioners struggling to find a role, and we've seen
because this could have been their moment in the sun.
It could. And the ones who have had the moment in the sun have been very good multi-academy trusts. Okay. And the reason is because they have been able to combine that kind of collective strength and power and decision making with knowing their schools really well and having really strong bonds of trust with those schools. So I think that one of the leadership outcomes of this situation will be a good hard look by the government at that middle tier, not in schools, but nationally. The government has been saying you must do this, you must do that. Actually, that's not possible without some mediating middle tier between the government and the school. And we've seen it being worked out between local authorities, multi-academy trusts, regional schools commissioners. I think it's the multi-academy trusts who have emerged the strongest from this.
And there's some big questions about local management of schools in the financial sense, of course, and the resource that's available and how differentially skewed that can be.
Yes, I mean, which was supposedly being addressed through the fair funding formula and the fair funding mechanism. So I think that we will see that being worked through. But of course, I'm beginning to sound like a proponent for multi-academy trusts here. But what you see within a multi-academy trust is that ability to move those resources around within the trust and address some of those inequalities that Ching mentioned. And what a lot of multi-academy trusts did in the first stages when the government was unsure as to what it was going to do with providing free school meals for children during the Easter holidays, it was multi-academy trusts who drew on their reserves to do that up front. And a lot of them did the same with purchasing IT equipment for disadvantaged children as well. And the government was kind of playing catch up behind that.
I mean, we really could talk about the policy angle of this for a very long time, but I'd like to switch to Ching now and ask a different question. Ching, I'm just wondering what research has been conducted that you know of on school leadership in the context of previous crises, and one example that springs to mind is Katrina in the US. And do you think we can apply empirical evidence from those kinds of studies to the current circumstance?
Thank you, Sandy. I've looked into the whole body of research focused on leadership during crisis, and there's a clear message, I think, is what Roger addressed on earlier, is crisis actually creates both challenges as well as opportunities for leaders. And I think what is also exposed is the importance of focusing on the basics. Of course, you know, with all these crises going on, but you do go through different phases. You know, for example, if you look into the McKinsey report, looking at the different phases the schools will have to respond. Now we're going into the reimagining phase, certainly in our trust, you know, also in some other local authority focused meetings I attended, you know, school leaders thought we're now going into the next phase. Can we think about the future? You know, the reimagining phase. And so I would say the practices may sound typical academics. Practices may alter because the context would always change, but the principles are quite similar. You know, those issues we talked about, relationships matter. And also what's coming up from that body of research is the resilience and being optimistic as school leaders. You see the future, but also you see how you quick fix the crisis. But also at the heart of that is when we deal with uncertainty and coming out of that quick fix is to think about the, you know, developing teachers and supporting school leaders. That's kind of from the research is a repeated message. That's, you know, how we continue really questioning profoundly the meaning of professionalism, the kind of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that we need to prepare our school leaders for the future. And no one knows what the future is like. And when we write about school leadership, fundamentally, it is about managing change, it's about leading change, and actually how to create the conditions and the cultures for sustained improvement. So I do agree with Roger. Certainly in our multi-academy trust, now we see the communication is important, how you function on different platforms, in different scenarios, in different spaces to keep the communication flow, and shared values and shared vision and trust are the foundation for everything else to go on. You know, I think those are the key messages as I can see coming out from the research in America, not only just the post-Katrina, but also like the school shooting and how schools quickly react, respond, and then move into the future.
Thank you. I mean, that is interesting to think about changes in professionalism. And we've had a question from Joseph Perkins, and he's wondering what the effect is of head teachers leading through their laptops. And he's asked, what is the potential effect of this on in using technology in a wider sense? What's been the impact on school leaders, particularly for non-teaching tasks? And I'm wondering if Roger can respond to that.
Yeah, a great question. I'm going to that word reimagine that Ching used is crucial, because that's how you stay positive and that's how you stay energized beyond this. And I think that the question there is really pertinent to that, because schools are reimagining how they use technology for the learning of children. But we've also seen a massive change in the way in which schools and teachers have operated since March using that. And it's actually been incredibly liberating. So if you think of most professional development, you know, pre-COVID, it usually involved a meeting of some kind of, you know, anything from 6 to 600 people in a hall, or going to a conference. And that means that somebody somewhere has had to agree to somebody going off on a course, having time out, paying the fee, paying the supply cover, all that kind of stuff. What we saw with the explosion of staff development opportunities online is that they were all, well, the vast majority of them were free, and the vast majority of them were short, and the vast majority of them you could watch recordings. And so we saw a real explosion of teachers accessing that professional development. And I think it was partly because they were at home and actually they could. And I think there's also something interesting about the fact that they didn't have to go through a gatekeeper. They didn't have to go and ask permission or get funding to do this professional development. They could look at these menus of what was available and dip in and out. We also saw a vast explosion in our trust, for example. We used to have weekly meetings of heads. That was difficult for a lot of them to get to. They might have to travel half an hour to get there, half an hour back. It's a whole morning gone. You could have a quick meeting between 8 and 9 in the morning. Wham! Everybody's in there. Everybody's communicating. And they end the week with a kind of silly one, the equivalent of after office drinks on a Friday to just kind of share experiences. So we know that teaching is a people profession. People aren't going to go wholly online, but I think they're going to be much smarter and much more efficient in the way in which they use it going forward. Really exciting, I think.
So it sort of sounds like it's refreshing the parts that Teachers TV tried to reach and never quite managed to.
Yeah.
So Ching, I'm just wondering, how do you think society's going to see this now in professional terms then, and the idea of holistic school settings meeting the whole child and family needs and that kind of thing as an offshoot of professionalism?
So that's a really great question, Sandy. I think there was some research surveys coming out just before the summer break. I think the society showed greater understanding about the challenges the teaching profession is facing or was facing. Homeschooling, lots of parents reporting that they understood better how to support and all the frustrations of not being able to support their children's learning. And being a parent myself, I certainly welcome the schools reopened again. And I think it's, if anything, we also see, as Roger mentioned earlier, the grades kind of, because of the understanding, I think, you can see schools, communities working closely together. And that's the only way to actually, for everyone to survive this crisis. And we've seen, just within our local community, how we work with schools now, doing the charity work to support children in challenging circumstances to celebrate Christmas. I think, those are great things and heartwarming things to see. I think, I was taken away by a paper by Lindsay Anderson writing about leadership during crisis. I think the genuine questions, for all of us to ask together is, what do you need and how can I help?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? But we've had another question from a member of the public who's asked about what your response is to the survey suggesting many heads may leave their roles sooner than they had planned because they're burning out from the COVID-19 episode, which is the flip side of that, if you like, the emotional work of accommodating the school community.
I think I would be interested in hearing what Roger says. But certainly as a researcher, when I was thinking, Schumann wrote in 1984-87 about the nature of the profession, the teaching profession is filled with unavoidable uncertainties. And this is just another extreme example that school leaders have to deal with. And I think it also goes back to about what kind of schools are more likely to suffer and in what circumstances. And certainly in our trust, because of the the work we've done well before this, we were able to maneuver the expertise, the capacity to actually create the support that single schools are unable to manage, given the quick turnaround time and the mechanism, the complexity of the challenges. So I think, certainly as researchers, we need to ask more powerful questions about understanding not only the percentage, but where the percentage are more likely to be, what kind of situations, what are the challenges are, therefore how the system is able to support better. And the issues Roger mentioned about the mediating layer, we can trace back to more than 10 years ago now. McKinsey, in their report looking at education systems, talked about the importance of the mediating layer. So I would agree with him strongly what Roger talked about, in these situations when if you are a single school, you don't have that support network, it would be extremely difficult to not only talking about expertise and capacity, but also the resources and the emotional support that school leaders also need. I liked what the NAHT wrote in their latest reports about treating developing teachers and school leaders as a professional entitlement. I think this is something that we learn from this crisis, and looking at actually all those stuff we write about successful school leadership. It matters in this kind of crisis: collaboration, the trust, the relationships, the expertise and capabilities of our teachers, and the networks schools have.
So we've got about just a few minutes left now, so I'd just like to ask you both one more question. So Roger, how do you think, I'd like to think about the past, present and future of educational research on school leadership. We've thought a little bit about that at the edges, but specifically, how do you think it's evolved in recent years? And do you think the pandemic will have an influence on the types of research that we will see and that we should be doing?
Whoa, what a question. I think in terms of, I think we have a system which is undergoing change of more than one kind at the moment. So we've got rapid change as a result of the pandemic, but we've also got, ironically, the pandemic introduced a whole new raft of initiatives from the government in terms of recruitment and retention of teachers, things like the early career framework, reformed MPQs, reformed teaching schools. So I think it will, there's a whole raft of stuff to look at in terms of how have schools reimagined in the light of the pandemic. But at the same time, we've got a whole raft of new initiatives in education, which I think are going to provide a lot of meat for researchers to get their teeth into as well, alongside, of course, the impact of the new curriculum reforms that are just coming through. So I think it will be a really interesting research task if there is, well, to see if there is improvement in the quality of education for all children, including the disadvantaged, but then to try and unpick what were the factors which had the biggest impact, I think will be a really interesting research challenge.
And Ching, what do you want to be seeing? I presume you review as many research funding applications as I do, if not more. What are the ones that you want to see coming across your desk in the next little while?
Good question, Sandy. I'd like to see more about how we understand the profession better, think about the meaning of the professionalism better, not just the meaning, but also the enactment of professionalism in across different contexts of schools. And here I don't just mean socioeconomic deprivation, but also the capability of schools, different school cultures. That's what I would really like to see, and also take well-being seriously. I think well-being is not just about teachers having extra hours, extra time. Fundamentally, well-being is also about teachers are able to and feel they are able to do their job well on a daily basis, and to be able to achieve that, there are a whole range of factors really impacting on that. So, you know, how we review the trust, how we review professional autonomy, and a whole range of things. I think, yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, quick poll results before we finish. We asked the audience, has your experience of school leadership during the COVID crisis mainly been exhausting, energising, fulfilling or other? We have 50% exhausting, 25% energising, 0% fulfilling, oh dear, and 25% a mysterious other. On that note, we're very sadly, we're out of time, and so we'll need to leave it there. I'd like to thank you for all your comments and questions. Thank you very much for sending those in. And a big thank you to our speakers, Chingu and Roger Pope. Stay safe, everybody, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for downloading and listening to this IOE podcast from the UCL Institute of Education, University College London.